Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jake, thanks so much for having me.
I am very much, as I was sharing off air, excited about today's conversation. One, as small as the CrossFit world we've never directly crossed paths, but I have been so familiar with your name and the work you've done. And so it's really exciting now just to kind of get caught up on what's changed, what's new, how your idea has grown, and really more than that, introduce it to hopefully some new friends, some new fans, and people that want to get involved as well. But before we kind of dive into what's going on today, and I know you've told the story a ton, but I would love to go back a little bit to maybe before it started. I heard you talk recently on the How'd You Build This podcast with Guy Raz. And so I'm going to tell people to go listen to that for a great dive into some of the background, especially some of the challenges you went through early in life. But one of the things that I heard you say that stood out to me was around this idea of the girls that had a community of running that you got involved with. And then
Yes.
obviously seeing your work with CrossFit.
Yes.
How has community and relationships really been impactful in your life? And what are some of those key communities along the way that have helped you just, I would say more than anything, they may have changed your trajectory?
Yeah, they very much did. So in 2000, I was getting out of rehab for the second time for my drug addiction. I had relapsed after a year in recovery. And I knew this time around that I had to make a lot of changes, like basically change everything about my life if I wanted to maintain my recovery. And the first thing that came to mind was you should start going to the gym. I had never been to the gym in my whole life. I was not an exerciser. I was not an athlete as a kid. I always preferred books to sports. But I thought a healthy person with healthy habits would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and start going to the gym before work. So that's what I started to do. And when I got into the gym, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was like kind of poking around on the machines, but I knew how to work a treadmill. So I would get on the treadmill and I would jog. And I, again, had never jogged a day in my life, but I thought this is what a healthy person would do. And there were a group of 5 other women at the gym, all different ages and different stages in life. Some were younger like me, some were 20 years older in their 50s. And they saw me in the locker room one day and they said, hey, we noticed you running on the treadmill. We have a little running group and we get together a couple mornings a week and we run from the gym. Do you want to come with us? And I thought, this is wild because I'm not going to be able to keep up. But something in me said, say yes. So I said yes. And these women became my support system, my sense of community. They helped me forge my new sense of identity. They didn't know until I told them many months later that not that long ago I was doing drugs and heroin, snorting heroin. And they just knew me as this new girl who had come to the gym trying to get healthier. And so they became an incredibly important part, not only of my recovery, but to be able to see myself through their eyes was really powerful. And I think really felt very secure and very safe for me. So I ran with them for a really long time. We stayed in touch for a really long time, even after kind of life changes made us go different directions. And shortly, maybe I'd say 2006, so a few years later, I found CrossFit. And CrossFit became a very similar type of community for me. CrossFit taught me that I could not only be a runner, that I could be strong, that I could be athletic, that I could be coordinated, an idea that had never really occurred to me. It introduced me to a ton of different people who would then go on to help support this new career path and brand and program that I had launched. But, CrossFit very much became my world and my life in a very healthy way for many years following 2006. So, and now I have the Whole30 community, which is very much the same thing. So community has played a big role, I think, in my own personal development, obviously in my professional development, and it is very much at the heart of what we do at Whole30 as well.
I love it. Well, and that's one of the things from kind of the outside and knowing friends who have gone through it and the Whole30 challenges that gyms did was the community aspect. And so when you paired that, what I saw firsthand, you pair that with the CrossFit side too, it was a really cool thing to witness. And obviously we believe our relationships and the quote teammates in life really have an impact on our trajectory. So it's really helpful hearing you say that. You said 2 things there that I actually am really curious about. The first is you ask yourself the question, what would a healthy person do? A healthy person would get up at 5 a.m. and go work out. you were creating role models for the identity that you were trying to create or the life you were trying to change at that time. Was that the first time you ever had done that? Or have there been other instances maybe in your journey where you're like, if I want that, what would that type of person do? Because I don't think a lot of us tend to ask ourselves that question. We just want kind of the outcome without asking, what's a choice that type of person would make?
I had never, first of all, I know now that what I was embracing was a growth mindset. And I didn't know what it was called at the time. And I had never really thought about it at the time. In fact, I think I was very much stuck in a fixed mindset. You know, I was the smart one. My sister was the sporty one. So I never really pursued sports. It never really occurred to me that I could be athletic. I just pursued reading books and getting good grades. But when I got out of rehab, I realized that I really had to kind of change my entire identity. I had to embrace this identity of a healthy person with healthy habits. Even though yesterday I was doing drugs, today I was a healthy person with healthy habits. And so the metric that I created for myself was, would a healthy person with healthy habits do this? And I weighed all of my decisions against that rubric. Would that person say yes to this party where they didn't know who would be there and what kind of stuff they would be doing? No, a healthy person would not do that. Would a healthy person stop smoking, even though at all of her AA and NA meetings, everybody smoked? Yeah, a healthy person with healthy habits would quit smoking. So it really became a touchstone for my life and a way to help me step into this new identity, even though I felt like I didn't deserve it. And I very much still felt like an imposter. But it made it easier for me to make the decisions that supported my health and my recovery. Just that simple question.
Awesome. Well, so let me ask you on that same note, because I know recently you've posted this year, running has changed. That relationship has changed due to some health and not being able to run the way you wanted to or used to. Have you had an issue of looking back at, well, I used to be able to do this and I can't do it at that level, and dealing with that frustration or lack of confidence? And how have you navigated that, knowing part of your rebuild and when you rewrote your story, running was such a big piece of it and the people in it were a piece of it?
I have struggled with that, I think, as everyone does, you know, looking back and thinking, oh, I used to be able to do this. But instead of, I think I've learned this through like so much, doing so much therapy and self-work. But instead of saying, you know, beating myself up for not being able to do what I used to be able to do, or getting down on myself, or trying to shame or judge myself or punish myself into it, I look back at past Melissa and acknowledge I am not that person. Past Melissa, when she was running 8-minute miles and could do half marathons after like, you know, a night of 3 margaritas, she didn't have kids. She didn't have a business that she was running. She didn't own a house. She wasn't taking care of anybody but herself. She had very little responsibility in the big scope of things. And she had a body that was like 25 years younger than the body that I have today. So I look at that and I think it was so awesome that past Melissa could do that. Current Melissa has a very different context, but I still want to embrace the joy that I felt when I ran, the freedom that I felt, the sense of community, the sense of being outside. So how can I do that today in a way that honors my current context? And when I really stopped fighting that and embracing this concept of like, okay, but this is what it is today, so how am I going to handle it today? That's when I really started to love running again. And I started running more again. And I started running further distances again because I wasn't holding myself to a set of unrealistic standards that I could no longer reasonably maintain.
I love that. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And the reason I wanted to ask that is because a lot of times we'll talk about this. Whole30 has a lot to do with what we're eating or what we're removing from our diet, being very intentional. And it's very easy at times to get off track really easy with your nutrition and give up altogether. Or look back at where you were 10, 20 years ago and think, well, I'm not like that, or I'm not in that kind of shape, and I just can't get there. And so you kind of give up on the process versus just what you talked about, reflecting on the different journeys and the different life stages. And so that I appreciate kind of how you frame that, because I think that's really helpful for our listeners. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about this journey of Whole30 and really where the impetus came from, as well as going through the life changes, which I'm going to still refer to Guy's podcast to for most of that. What's changed about day one when you started just giving those talks and experimenting with like pulling stuff out of meals to what today looks like?
I mean, so much. We're talking about a 15-year journey, right? A
Yeah.
15-year kind of overnight success, if you will. The Whole30 started as a two-person self-experiment. As you mentioned, I was really into CrossFit, my performance, my recovery. The idea was, what if we did this super squeaky clean, like pulled these potentially inflammatory foods out of our diet for 30 days? What would happen? And I was hoping to see performance and recovery improvements. And instead, it radically transformed every single aspect of my life. My health underwent a radical transformation, the likes of which I didn't even realize I needed. I thought I felt great. And it turns out I didn't know how good I could feel until I did my first Whole30. I created new healthy habits for navigating stress and negative emotion and discomfort. It taught me all of the ways that I was using food the way I used to use drugs. And that was really eye-opening. It gave me an entirely new relationship with food and my body. I was able to get off the scale and out of the mirror for the first time in my whole life. It was such a powerful transformation that I wanted to share it with everybody. And I wrote about it on.
Can I ask you a little bit about that beginning?
Yeah.
Because y'all went through this kind of together, your co-founder. Did having somebody experimenting and going through that journey with you, I would say almost help? Because I would imagine like once you start cutting stuff out, you're having withdrawals, as you talked about, you're looking for where am I coping through food and other outlets to where if no one else is going through it with you, it's kind of like, right, if nobody knows what we're doing, we can get away with cutting corners and that lack of accountability. Whereas if somebody's doing it with you, you've kind of got a partner in the trenches. Was that helpful part of the process when I would say your body started reacting differently of like, what are you doing?
I think it's an incredibly important part of the process. And I always recommend that people who do the Whole30 get support and accountability, whether it's with an in-person partner or a group or a CrossFit gym or people at work or an online support system. My personality is such that I don't find changes like that hard. Maybe it's because I was like a really good drug addict. So now it's like if someone says to me, can you just do this thing for 30 days? I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. And my experience was very different than my co-founders in that we both had equally stunning transformations, but his was more physical. He experienced a lot of relief of shoulder tendonitis that he hadn't been able to heal. Mine were very much emotional and mental. But yes, having somebody there, I would not have given up or deviated from the plan, whether anybody was watching or not. That's just my personality. But it's incredibly helpful for any habit change. And I mean, habit research shows this, to have that accountability and to have that support partner, which is why community is such a big part of Whole30 today.
Love it. Love it. Well, I appreciate you sharing that because that was the one thing that always stood out to me. And especially given some of the journey you'd already been on, right? Of drugs and alcohol and how you navigated school to rehab that, having gone through that, I would imagine your ability to recognize things was enhanced over, say, somebody who hasn't. But I was curious about going through in the community because community is such a big piece with Whole30. Okay, so it started, y'all were given like lectures at CrossFit gyms, right? And eventually selling tickets to it. But when did it start to become more than just, hey, we're doing seminars to we're building a business?
Yeah, I mean, I never set out to build a business. I never wanted to own my own business. I just wanted as many people as possible to hear about and change their lives with the Whole30. After doing about 2 or 3 years of seminars at various CrossFit gyms, which again, I was very ingrained within the CrossFit community. CrossFit was very well connected. Before the days of Instagram and most social media, it was the CrossFit forum. So gyms would talk and they would invite us and get tremendous results with their members. And it attracted the notice of a very small book publisher based out of Las Vegas. So he reached out and was like, do you want to write a book about this? And that was always my dream. I always wanted to write a book. I figured all of these seminars we were doing and the presentations were really just leading up to what we would put in a book. And so we wrote the first book. It came out in 2012. It hit the New York Times bestseller list, I think 3 months later in September. And I think that was the moment where it was like, oh, this is a real thing. I still didn't have health insurance, but this was a real business and a real brand that had real staying potential.
Yeah, because you left your full-time job after kind of a retention window. When you stayed a few years, you got a bonus, and then you're like, I'm going to give this a shot.
That's right. That was in 2010. So between 2010 and 2012, this was, seminar building, it was website building, it was testing our material, giving a ton of stuff away for free. and not having anything to sell our community other than attendance at these, seminars that we did maybe a couple times a month.
Okay, so let me ask this for anybody listening. What was your background? What was your day job? What did you focus on in college? Because they're probably thinking, oh, you were a personal trainer or a nutritionist or medical focus, of course, because you have this company that focuses on food and what you're putting in. But that really wasn't the case.
No, that's not my background. So my background is in business. That's my undergraduate degree. And I've always had a real interest in and have had, fitness certifications and nutrition certifications. I was a certified sports nutritionist for a while. But I'm not the person who is studying the research, analyzing the research, kind of approving our meal plans. We have registered dietitians, medical doctors, licensed healthcare providers like psychiatrists and psychologists, physical therapists. We work with a wide variety to this day of our medical advisory board. So they're the ones who are creating the meal plan. They're sort of looking at the recipes. They are reviewing our Whole30 program rules against the current science. I'm the, kind of visionary in terms of how to communicate this, how to take the sciencey information and translate it for people in a way that feels accessible. I'm, the person who I think has all of the ideas about the resources that we can create for Whole30. I can spot the pain points for talking to people in our community and figure out how to create a resource or a book or an offering to help them succeed. So that has always been my role, but we do have a robust medical advisory board to make sure that the program is safe and healthy and grounded in science.
100%. And what I'd love to follow up on that is when y'all started, there was, and I've heard you talk about this, the paleo was a big deal in the early days of CrossFit and some of the other nutrition focuses of the past. Y'all were experimenting with what do we remove? And I'm curious, what was kind of the thought process of why not, instead of doing what's already out there, what if we start testing something a little bit different?
Mm-hmm. So in the very first iteration of Whole30 that I did with my co-founder, it was literally based on a nutrition seminar we had attended where the person giving the seminar said, these are the food groups that can be potentially inflammatory. These are the ones you'd want to play around with. So we just kind of went off of that. However, when I went through my Whole30 experience, I noticed the ways in which I was trying to game the system a little bit. I noticed some of the areas where I had sticking points, and so built those experiences into further iterations of the program rules and started to do more research into the science of behavior change and habit research. That's a really big part of Whole30. In the earliest days, our first iteration was largely based upon the framework of a paleo diet, but we quickly morphed from that to, okay, well, let's actually look at the literature behind these food groups. And even though Lauren Cordain says white potatoes aren't paleo, we're going to include those in the Whole30 program because they're a whole real nutrient dense food with plenty of positives. So over the course of the years, really since 2010, we've taken the approach of looking at the literature, making sure that the food groups we eliminate are commonly problematic enough to want to test them. And we're always making changes to the Whole30 program rules. In fact, there are new rule changes to be found in the new Whole30 book as well.
And that leads me to where we're going with this. Today, you have, there's so much more to it, which is what was exciting for me when I was prepping for today, and we got introduced to a mutual friend, but I start looking, I was like, oh, I'm super familiar. And then I start going on your site and I'm like, well, wait a minute. There's meal delivery now, there's approved products, there's so much more since the seminars and the book. And you've got this new book coming out. This episode's airing early August. Your book released on August 6th. What is the new Whole30? What's changed? What's grown? What have we learned that's a little bit different for somebody that's like, oh, I'm familiar with it. I've done the challenge, or I play around with it. For me, what's new for me in this one?
Yeah. So the flagship book for the Whole30 program called The Whole30, I wrote it in 2014. It came out in 2015. So that's 9 years ago. And that was kind of the how-to manual for how to do the program. And it's good. The information holds up. The rules haven't changed a ton since then. The program structure of elimination and reintroduction hasn't changed. But a lot has changed since then. Best practice recommendations. In the earliest days, when you find something that you love that works so well for you, like the Whole30 or like CrossFit, you tend to be very rigid and dogmatic about it, right? It's like, this is what I'm
Yep.
going to do. Everybody should do this. There is no, none of these other periodization. We don't need to do that. Less than
Nope.
100%. We don't need to do that. And then you get older and wiser and you understand other people's different lived experience and you start to go, okay, hold on a minute. We can take the principles that work for us, but also serve to make it more welcoming, more inclusive, more accessible, and probably even make it better because we're not so rigid and we're not so dogmatic. The science has also been, updated. We've got 9 more years of studies, and some of the things that we thought back in 2015 were problematic enough to exclude from the program, we no longer believe that they are based on the current research. So those needed to change. We created a plant-based version of the program for people who wanted to do the Whole30 but not include any animal protein for whatever reason. And so that iteration is included in the new book. And there was just a lot of voice and tone that needed updates. If you had talked to me in 2014, there would have been a very tough love, unempathetic, unforgiving Melissa. And that was like CrossFit Melissa. And that
Yeah.
it worked for me. That was how I talked to myself. But I have since gone through a very public divorce and business split, and I had a baby, and I got a concussion, and like all of these things that have led me to be far more empathetic, far more understanding of my own privilege, far more understanding of other people's lived experience. And I wanted that language to be reflected in this new book. I don't want to look back at old books and think, ugh, I wouldn't write it like that today, and then not be able to update that in a way that feels really good and in my own integrity. So that's what you'll find in the new Whole30.
I love that. And for anybody that's unfamiliar with it, you really start with this 30-day elimination. You're pulling things out to see how you respond and then slowly adding them back in. And one of the things I heard you say on a couple of other podcasts that I'd love to dive into is there's no such thing as like good food or bad food, which seems contrary to everything we hear of in nutrition of like, that's bad, don't eat that. But you're saying what's not really good food or bad food, is it more how our bodies respond to it?
Yes, and context. I think there's a lot of, it's very sexy on social media when you call a food toxic or poisonous or bad or give it a label or make people feel shamed or judged. But when you think about it, there are no universally good or bad foods, right? People would say broccoli is healthy. Well, not for my dad because he gets terrible stomach pain every time he tries to eat it raw. And you could even say, well, surely sugar is bad. Well, maybe not for a type 1 diabetic or not for me when I'm out doing a 10-mile hike and I really need the fuel. Context always matters. Nuance always matters. Healthy for whom and in what context. And I think it's really important to disassociate morality from food and morality around us when we eat food. Food is not good or bad. There are some foods that are more nutritious and some foods that are less nutritious, but all foods have their place. And we are not good or bad based on the food that we eat. And that's a really big part of the Whole30 language and program and the mindset shift is moving us out of that kind of diet culture language and into a different relationship with food and our bodies.
So on those lines, if I heard correctly, you were a child that would skip mass to go to Mickey D's.
Yeah. We used to call it the Church of the Golden Arches. Yes.
The Church of the Golden Arches. So I laugh because my wife's favorite cheap food snack is chicken nuggets from McDonald's. Like we know they're not actual chicken, but like that is her, like all of our friends know it. It's a joke. And so I'm curious, like as the face of Whole30, you're focused heavily on like health and relationship with food. How do you still mix in any of those sugars or sweets, or do you at all anymore still mix in that stuff to what you eat?
Yes, I do so. And I do so effortlessly and joyfully and without guilt. I have figured out through my Whole30s that there are a number of foods that work very well in my system. In fact, I perform better when I include white rice and oatmeal and black beans and hummus. I'm a person who runs much better on more carbohydrates. So those foods work great for me. I'm also someone who loves Justin's peanut butter cups. I love a McDonald's hot fudge sundae with extra hot fudge. I love my love for Cadbury cream eggs is famous. It is probably the least real food-like product that I eat, but my mom sends me 3 every Easter, and they remind me of my Easter basket and home and my family, and I eat them with so much joy and reverence. And to me, that is healthy. And all of these things exist in my life in a balance that I get to decide in a way that keeps me feeling exactly as good as I want to feel and keeps my diet as broad and joyful as possible. And that is the point of the Whole30. That's the whole reason we exist, is to help people do that.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I knew what answer I was going to get, although I didn't know about the extra hot fudge. That sounds incredible.
That's the key.
I wanted to set it up because a lot of times we get into conversations, especially when someone has a business or does nutrition coaching, and it's like none of that. Like some people, it's like full extreme. And some people, that's probably the best case. But other people are like, I'm not going the rest of my life without Thin Mint Girl Scout cookies. Like, how do I have this lifestyle? And so hearing someone who's like, I'm focused on food and how I feel, but I'm also learning, like, I'm going to create the space for that. I'm creating the margin for those things that you enjoy. And so I appreciate your transparency with that I would say a lot in the industry we just don't always see. Okay, so Melissa, the new book is out, Amazon. We've got it linked here in the show notes. We've also got Whole30 linked in the show notes for you to get connected, as well as follow you online. You put out some great content on Instagram. Your reels are fantastic. And just really, you're raw. You're a very real follow. And so for anyone that's on the journey, is thinking about going on the journey, I highly encourage you to follow Whole30. But one of the things you talked about a few times that I want to start to wrap up with is community. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about aspects of where people can get involved with the Whole30 community so they don't suddenly change how they're eating and living their lifestyle in isolation.
Yes. So we offer so many different touch points to stay connected to your growth mindset and your food freedom plan and your Whole30 accountability and support partner. Obviously, we have a thriving community on social media. I think we've got 4 or 5 million combined fans and followers on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube. We also offer a few times a year Whole30 community cohorts. So we'll have one starting on Tuesday, September 2nd, I believe. And it's the Tuesday after Labor Day. But if you want to do the Whole30 and you don't want to do it by yourself, but you're also somewhat uncomfortable with sharing all of your, challenges and goals in a public setting, we've got this private group that we run that's run by Whole30 HQ. I'm involved every single week. There's an Ask Me Anything with me. You can get daily video support, daily text message support, and that sense of a closed and private, really welcoming, really inclusive community for support and guidance and, resources and tough love where you need it. So that's another way of staying connected. There's also a really thriving Whole30 community on Reddit that I don't run, but I participate in regularly because it is so well run and executed, and everybody in that community is just so welcoming and so kind. I absolutely love it over there. And then I also have a closed Substack community where we talk about, again, behind kind of a paywall, closed doors, where we talk about other stuff. We talk about relationships and fitness and health and trauma and recovery and all of those other areas that are so tangential to Whole30.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you sharing them. We actually have links in the show notes, one to the Guy Raz podcast that we've talked about, but another one of yours I listened to, I really appreciated, on boundaries, setting boundaries, dealing with boundaries. And so for anyone who struggles to set boundaries with family or friends or life in general, like, it's a really good conversation. And so we've got it linked here in the show notes as well. I'm completely blanking on whose podcast it was, other than I've got it saved. Cool. So Melissa, this has been so much fun. I appreciate you investing the time into our community and coming on the show this week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jake. Thanks for having me.